Her name appears in all four Gospels, at the crucifixion, the burial, the empty tomb. No male disciple has that consistency. They all ran. She didn't. That's the question nobody stops to ask about Mary Magdalene. Not who she was, not what the church did with her name. Something simpler. Why her? When Jesus was arrested in Gethsemane, the disciples fled. Mark writes it plainly, no explanation given. They all abandoned him and ran. Peter followed as far as the high priest's courtyard, denied knowing Jesus 3 times before the night was over, and disappeared. They had reasons. Good ones. A Galilean accent in Jerusalem that night, while a Galilean teacher was on trial, was genuine danger. These weren't cowards. They were men calculating the odds, and their math was sound. But she stayed. Through the trial, through the crucifixion, she watched where they laid the body. And before dawn on the 3rd day, while the others were still behind locked doors, she walked out alone toward a sealed tomb with no plan for what came next. No reasonable explanation for going back. The answer to why doesn't lie in courage, not in the ordinary sense of that word. It lies in something that had already happened to her, something the text describes in just 2 words. And for nearly 2,000 years, almost everyone has read those 2 words and gotten them wrong. But first, you need to know where she came from. Her name was Mary, from Magdala. That matters more than most people realize. Magdala, Migdal in Hebrew, meaning tower, was not a small fishing village on the edge of a lake. It was one of the largest commercial centers on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Archaeologists excavating the site since 2009 have uncovered colonnaded streets, warehouses, a marketplace, and a monumental synagogue containing a carved stone depicting the menorah of the Jerusalem temple, the only stone of its kind ever found outside Jerusalem. They call it the Magdala stone. It sits in the Israel Museum today. The city's Greek name was Tarichaia, meaning place of salted fish. Magdala exported preserved fish across the Roman Empire. This was a wealthy, connected city, fully integrated into the economy of the ancient world. She did not come from nothing. She was not nobody, and then something happened to her. Luke records it briefly, almost in passing. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. That's all, no details, no context, just the number, 7, and the fact that it was over. For nearly 2,000 years, those 2 words, 7 demons, have been read one way. A woman with a dark moral past, a sinner redeemed. That reading traces back to a single sermon by Pope Gregory I in AD 591, in which he merged Mary Magdalene with the unnamed sinful woman in Luke 7, the one who washed Jesus' feet with her tears. 2 entirely different women in the text. Gregory decided they were the same person. The Catholic Church formally corrected this in 1969. Almost nobody knows. But the problem isn't only that Gregory was wrong. The problem is that even if you read it correctly, daimonia in 1st century Greek does not describe sexual sin. No ancient text connects the 2. Daimonia describes suffering, serious illness, extreme mental anguish, the complete collapse of a life. The number 7 in Jewish culture indicated severity, not category. It meant, whatever this was, it had taken over every part of her. She came from a prosperous city. She had independent means. Luke 8 uses the Greek word hyperchanton, a legal term for personal property, to describe how she and several other women financially supported Jesus and the disciples. This wasn't a donation, it was her money. In a world where women rarely controlled anything, that detail is worth pausing on. And then something destroyed all of it, severe enough to be described as 7, severe enough that the text was still recording it decades later. And then it ended, and she followed Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem, 120 kilometers. And never went back. She left Magdala and never went back. Around 30 years after she followed Jesus to Jerusalem, the Romans moved through Galilee. In AD 67, during the Jewish-Roman War, they destroyed Magdala. The colonnaded streets, the warehouses, the marketplace, the synagogue with its carved menorah stone. All of it gone. The city was never rebuilt. She didn't know that when she left. She only knew that something mattered more than staying. The name of that city exists today because of her name. And then, she was there. She was there when they crucified him. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all four record it, not as a minor detail, as a fact. She stood and watched while the men who had sworn they would die before they abandoned him were hiding somewhere in the city. In the honor-shame culture of the first century, being present at a public execution was not a sentimental gesture. It was a specific social function. Witnessing for the family of the condemned, ensuring the death was recorded, that the body would be properly cared for. When the family was absent, the women present were functioning as his kinship group, not sentiment, obligation. Roman crucifixions were positioned in public places, near main roads, outside the city walls, visible from a distance. That was the point. Crucifixion was not punishment. It was theater. Rome wanted people to watch. And among those watching that day, she was one of the few who stayed until the end. She watched where they put the body. Mark records this specifically. She watched Joseph of Arimathea roll the stone across the entrance of the tomb. She knew which tomb. She knew where the stone was. And when the Sabbath was over, before dawn, she went back. She wasn't alone this time. 2 other women came with her, carrying spices to finish the burial ritual the Sabbath had interrupted. On the way, they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away for us?" Nobody had an answer. They kept walking. The tomb was empty. 2 figures in white, a message none of them knew what to do with. She ran to find Peter and John. They came, looked inside, and went home. John records this without comment. They went home. She stayed, standing outside the tomb, crying. Then she bent down and looked inside again, and saw 2 figures sitting where the body had been. They asked her, "Why are you crying?" She said, "Because they have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." Then she turned, and there was a man standing there. She thought he was the gardener. He asked her, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And then he said her name, not the Greek Maria, the Aramaic Mariam, the language of home, of someone who had known her a long time. A sound she recognized in a way nothing else could explain. She turned. And that is where everything changes. Go back to the original question. Why her? Peter had more reason to stay than she did. He had followed Jesus for 3 years, had witnessed the miracles, had stood up in front of everyone and declared that Jesus was the Messiah. John had more reason to stay. He was the disciple Jesus loved, the one sitting closest to him at the Last Supper. The other 10 had more reason to stay. They had left everything, been chosen by name, been given a specific mission. They ran. She didn't. The answer isn't character. It isn't that she was braver than them, more loyal, better in any ordinary sense of that word. The answer lies in what had already happened to her before she ever met Jesus. 7 demons was not a moral failure. It was evidence that she had already hit the bottom and been pulled out. Someone who has never lost everything doesn't know what the bottom looks like. They still have things to protect: reputation, safety, a future, an image of themselves they need to keep intact. When everything becomes dangerous, the first instinct is to protect those things. That's why the disciples ran, not because they didn't love Jesus, but because they still had too much to lose. She had already lost all of it before she ever met him. A life taken over by daimonia, severe enough to be described as 7, severe enough that the text was still recording it decades later, doesn't leave much worth protecting. No reputation, no planned future, no image of herself that needed to stay intact. When Jesus pulled her out of that, there was nothing left to lose anymore, except him. That isn't courage. That is what it looks like when someone has already seen the bottom and is no longer afraid of it. You don't run from the person who pulled you out, no matter how dangerous it gets, no matter how reasonable the math is, because nothing left is worth protecting more than the presence of that person. And that is why, when it was all over, when the tomb was sealed, when the disciples had gone home, when there was no reasonable explanation for staying, she was still there, outside the tomb, in the dark, crying. Not because she was stronger, because she had nothing left to lose, except the only thing that had ever pulled her out. Hippolytus of Rome, writing around AD 200, called her Apostola Apostolorum, apostle to the apostles, the first one sent. Not Peter, not John. The woman who had nothing left to lose, and was therefore the only one still there when there was something to see, before dawn, outside the walls of Jerusalem. A woman walking alone toward a tomb, no plan, no reasonable explanation for going back. You know how this ends, but maybe you read it differently now. Not because she was a hero, not because she was better than the ones who ran, but because she had already lost enough to stop calculating. Someone who has hit the bottom and been pulled out doesn't ask whether staying is worth it. They just stay. She was not the strongest person in that story. She was not the one with the most reasons to stay. She was the one who had lost enough to understand that some things matter more than safety. You may have met someone like that. Or maybe you have been that person, in some moment where you had no plan, no reasonable explanation, but stayed anyway. Hippolytus called her the apostle to the apostles, the first one sent. But before she was sent, before there was anything to announce, she was just a woman, standing outside a tomb in the dark, not knowing what came next. That's where the story changes, not because she was strong, because she already knew what the bottom looked like, and she knew who had pulled her out of it.